welcome back. We're going to continue talking about React, using form elements in React and building our weather app with React. In the previous video, we set up the form here with the input and this drop-down menu. What I'd like to do now is add some radio buttons. And normally, we wouldn't have radio buttons that controlled the same thing. Like our radio buttons are going to set the unit the same way this select does. But normally we wouldn't do that, but we'd use one or the other, right? We'd either use the radio buttons or we'd use the select to set one value. But I'm going to put the radio buttons in here just so we can see how radio buttons work with the form, okay? So our first step here is to create a radio button. And we do that by using the input, just like we did up here for input for the text there. But the difference is that when we create an input for a radio button, we set the type to radio. So we set this to radio like that, right? And then there we get the button. And you can see I can click on it right now. But it needs a label now. So the label for the radio button is a special tag called the label, right? So this is the label tag, and the label tag is used to label form elements. So let's put the label on here. So I'll put a label in there. Let's call it, what's the first one on our thing there? It's Celsius, right? Well, actually, let's call it metric, right? So I'm going to call it metric. And there's my metric label, right? And the label can go anywhere, right? Like you could put it over here, right? And then it's kind of on the other side. And actually, if I click on the label, nothing happens, right? So really, if you click on the label, it should also activate the button, okay? And you can see let me refresh. If I click on the label, like nothing's happening, right? I have to actually click on this little circle. The circle is pretty big, but that's only because I'm zoomed in. So if I zoom out, actually, this is pretty small, right? So the label makes it much easier for people to work with, right? So what we need to do is we need to associate the label with the input, okay? And there's two ways we can do that. We can do it with the for attribute, or we can put the input inside the label. So to use the for attribute, you give the input an ID. I'll call it metric. ID names need to be unique, remember, okay? So we can't use this name somewhere else, right? It has to be unique. You might want to make it more unique if you want, but for us, metric will work. And then you're going to say HTML4. In regular HTML, you just use the for attribute, but since we're in JSX, and this is actually an extension of the JavaScript language, for is a reserved word in JavaScript, so we have to use HTML4 in place, okay? And for, we match this to the ID name. So I'll put metric here. And now if I click on the name here, the label, you can see it activates the button. Okay, so I can click on the label now. So that's like a much better user experience. The alternate arrangement is to do this. I'm going to get rid of the ID and get rid of the for, the HTML4. And what I'll do is I'll put the input inside the label tag. Okay? And so with the input inside the label tag, it will work the same way. Okay, so you can see I can click on the label here and it activates the radio button. Okay? So we put this inside here, right? Okay, so now how do we get the other labels working? Well, let's make a few more labels here. So I'm going to copy this one and paste it. And then maybe I'm going to format this a little bit just so it's a little easier to read, right? And here I've got my first label, my second label, and my third label. Okay, and they all say metric right now, but what I want to do is I want the first one to be metric, the second one to be imperial, and the third one to be standard. Okay, and so now I've got the labels here. Maybe we need a little style there, but we'll fix that later. Okay, and now you can see that when I click on the label, the button becomes active, but there's a problem in that I can make them all active. And the whole point of the radio button as a user interface element is it offers an unlimited number of choices. You can have as many choices as you want, but you can only pick one. Okay, so the idea is you can only choose one of these things. And right now it looks like I can choose all of them, right? And I can't even turn them off after I click them, right? Okay. So how do we get that to work? Well, the way the browser sees this is the radio buttons that all use the same name are part of the same group, and only one in that group can be active. So I'm going to give each one of these radio buttons a name, right? So I'll give it a name attribute. I'll call it unit, okay? So everybody that is in the name, the unit name here, they are going to be in a group, and only one of them can be active at a time. So I'll save this, and when I refresh here, you can see only one of the radio buttons is active at any time. Okay? Okay, so we're making progress. So the next step is that I want to be able to control what the currently selected unit is. So I see imperial here, but when I click on standard here for the radio button, I want that variable, the unit variable, to show, you know, the state variable that we created in the last video to show imperial, right? So we need to be able to set the unit, right? So we need to be able to set this unit when you click on one of them. Also, if I were to change the unit, like go to Kelvin or go to Fahrenheit, right? I would want that imperial, like when I choose Fahrenheit, I want imperial here to show up, right? So we need to do that too. Okay, so we'll do that second part first because it's a little bit easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the checked property. So when checked is true, the radio button shows selected, right? And if checked is false, the radio button doesn't show anything, right? So that means here, if I said unit equals, I'm going to just put a JavaScript expression here. If the unit equals metric, then this first one is going to be selected, right? And then we'll copy that and I'll put it on the second one. And here, if the unit equals imperial, then the second one will be selected. And on the third one, if the unit equals standard, then this last one will be selected. With this change, if I choose one of the units here off of the select menu, you can see it activates the radio button because the unit variable, the value is changing, and then the component is re-rendering and it's changing the checked property or updating the checked property on these radio buttons. Okay. The problem now though is I can't change them, right? Because if I click on them, I need to change the unit property or the unit variable in order for them to show a different value, right? So let's do that, right? So the last step here is to add an onchange property, just like we did on the input and on the select, okay? So I'll add onchange, and what we're going to do is we're going to set up a function here, and we'll say set unit, and we'll set the unit to metric. So if you click on this button, the unit becomes metric, and then that will show this button, right? And let's copy this right here. And for the second radio button, we'll say set the unit to imperial, okay? And for the third one, we'll say onchange, set the unit to standard. Let's give it a try. So if I click on this, it changes to imperial, changes to standard. We can see that this menu isn't changing, right? So we want that to change too. They should match. It changes if I click on this, it'll change the radio button, but clicking the radio button isn't changing the menu. So let's fix that, right? So the select menu, you can see we're using onchange to set the unit, but when the unit changes, it doesn't actually select anything here. So what we need to do here is, I'm going to kind of add a little bit of formatting here. We're going to give this select a value. So I'm going to say value equals, and we'll put the unit here, okay? So as long as the unit matches one of the values here, that will select one of the options on the select. So now with that change, if I click on metric, the menu changes to metric. I see metric up here. If I click on standard, this button is active. This changes to Kelvin because that's actually the value is standard, and then I see standard up here. So that's working pretty good. So now we got our radio button set up. We could probably put some styles on these. That might be nice, right? Maybe a little space there, right? There isn't a lot you can do with these, right? You can't actually style the button. You can style the label though, right? And there's actually some really cool things you can do to style the radio buttons. You can really customize them, but you have to do it all through the label. You actually hide the input, right? Maybe we'll cover that later, okay? But for right now, maybe we'll stop here, and then in the next video, we'll start getting into the asynchronous JavaScript where we actually load some data, right, when you submit your zip code, okay? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.